Life can change in an instant. One act of kindness, one broken-down scooter on a lonely street, one unassuming mechanic who'd give his all to help a stranger. In a small town where dreams were often abandoned under the weight of hardship, James Henderson's life was about to shift forever. He was mocked for fixing that dilapidated scooter, ridiculed for thinking a simple act of charity could matter. But no one knew the real identity of the scooter's owner. Not even James. Soon, a remarkable revelation would crash through every assumption, turning a modest mechanic's world upside down in ways no one could have imagined. James Henderson lived in the kind of place where rumors traveled faster than cars, and hope seemed to run on fumes. The small town of Baywick, though coastal and picturesque, had seen better days. Factories had closed. Young folks with ambition had fled. Those who remained carved out life on the edges, patching together meager livelihoods from seasonal tourism or the odd job here and there. For James, the day began at sunrise with the screech of seagulls and the steady hum of the rotting fishing docks at the edge of town. He was a mechanic by trade, a caretaker at heart. Money was always tight, but he had no choice. His mother, Mary Henderson, was battling a chronic illness that often left her too weak to leave her bedroom. Medical bills piled up, draining James's slim savings. Yet despite each mounting challenge, he never complained. He never let sorrow quell the gentle warmth in his heart. Though skilled with engines, he could revive an ancient truck or coax a battered sedan back from the dead Baywick rarely provided enough work. Nobody around here had money for new cars. They just wanted to keep their aging vehicles running long enough to manage grocery runs and doctor visits. Day after day, James worked at the only local garage, Parker's Auto Repair. David Parker, the garage's owner, was a middle-aged man whose brown hair was streaked with the silver of stress. Years ago, David had taken James in as an apprentice right out of high school, teaching him everything about the trade. Now they scraped by, relying on each other's loyalty and skill. On a particular Monday morning, the sky was pearly grey, and a slight drizzle tapped on the metal roof above James's modest living space. He awoke in a haze of worry, head swirling with how to pay for new medication that the doctor insisted his mother desperately needed. He rubbed his tired eyes, looked at the photo on his bedside table. An old snapshot of him as a child, with his mother beaming from behind, both wearing broad smiles. That memory fueled him. Work that day involved changing the oil in a rusted station wagon for an elderly widow trying to fix the squealing brakes on a fisherman's battered pickup truck and diagnosing the strange rattling sound in David's own van. Not glamorous, but at least it was something. Even so, the sense of mounting impossibility clung to James like an invisible weight. When the afternoon sun finally burned through the grey, James decided to call it a day. He knew dinner would be a couple of scrambled eggs and some leftover bread. The money in his pocket wouldn't stretch to anything more extravagant. The thought ate at him, but he swallowed his frustration. He had no time or energy for self-pity. His mother's well-being came first. He was just about to lock up when he saw a scooter sputtering down the empty road toward the garage. It was bright blue, obviously older, and sounded as though the engine was on its last breath. The rider, wearing a simple white helmet, pulled up in front of the garage. James could see slender legs clad in jeans, a simple jacket, and the curious glint of wide eyes behind the helmet's visor. She killed the engine if it wasn't already dead, and removed her helmet. A cascade of light brown hair fell to her shoulders. She looked no older than 25, her eyes a striking hazel, tinged with both worry and hope. "Excuse me. Are you still open?" she asked, her voice quiet yet resolute. James raised an eyebrow and flashed a tired smile. "For a scooter in distress, always. What seems to be the trouble?" The woman introduced herself as Eleanor. She mentioned no last name, only that she was passing through. The engine had started stalling out just a few miles back, and she was afraid to drive any farther. She had no idea what was wrong. James, always ready to help, motioned her into the garage bay. He worked methodically, removing the scooter's side panel. Immediately he spotted corroded wiring and a cracked fuel line. It wasn't a hopeless case, but it would require a few hours of labor, plus some parts that might not be readily available in Baywick. As he rummaged through his boxes of spare components, he couldn't help noticing Eleanor studying her surroundings. She didn't look like the average local. Her clothes, though casual, were well-fitted and likely designer. She wore a watch that appeared far from the typical discount store variety. But there was something gentle in the way she responded to his questions, the way she observed him with genuine interest. "It may take me a while to fix," James said, a faint apology in his tone. "Parts are hard to come by around here. But I can jury-rig a temporary solution so you can get where you need to go. Once I track down the right parts, I'll give you a call." She gave him a gracious smile. "That'd be fantastic." "Thank you." She offered to pay up front, but James waved his hand. "I only charge when the job is done right. Once I'm sure it'll run safely, we can talk numbers." Outside, a few passers-by peered curiously through the open garage doors. One of them, a notorious local gossip named Linda Carmichael, shook her head in that condescending way small-town cynics do. People in Baywick rarely saw outsiders rolling in on fancy gadgets or wearing subtle, expensive touches. Linda sneered at James's generosity, snickering to someone next to her. "He's wasting his time again. She'll never pay." But James couldn't care less about Linda's mocking. He was more concerned that the girl in front of him, for all her composure, might be stranded in a town that didn't exactly welcome strangers. He offered her a seat on a battered wooden chair near the wall. She watched him with curiosity, occasionally asking about the tools or the process. He answered quietly, meticulously, going about his work. Word traveled. By the next day, half the town seemed to know about James's new project. At the single-screen cinema that doubled as a local hangout, he overheard sneers. "That mechanic's soft-hearted ways will put him in the poorhouse," grumbled Todd Mitchell, who ran the local hardware store and liked to remind everyone how little money floated around Baywick. Stephen Clark, another mechanic who ran a more upscale garage on the other side of town, scorned James's approach. "He's practically giving his work away. No wonder he's never grown beyond Parker's old shack." James tried to shrug it off, focusing instead on the job at hand. He'd tested the scooter's engine, replaced the cracked fuel line with an improvised solution, and patched up corroded wires. Finally, after hours of tinkering and carefully rechecking, he was satisfied the scooter was safe enough for short-distance travel. When he called Eleanor to let her know, she sounded relieved. "That's wonderful. Thank you so much, James," she said, her voice brimming with gratitude. "I'd like to pick it up today, if possible." Though James assured her it would only be a partial fix for now, she insisted it was enough, and she'd leave the scooter with him again if necessary. "I have a few errands to run, then I'll head out of town." "But I'd like to come back soon," she said mysteriously. When she arrived to pick it up, James could see that same gentle sincerity in her eyes, the kind that made him want to know more about who she was and why she had ventured into Baywick at all. When she tried to pay him, he noticed a crisp bill in her hand. Several large bills, actually. But James only took half of what she offered. It was more than enough to cover parts and labor. She looked a little confused, but then smiled in understanding. "Thank you for your honesty and kindness," she said, tucking the remaining cash back into her purse. She paused, searching for words. I may need more of your help soon, if you don't mind." James only nodded. "I'll be here." Eleanor left Baywick that same afternoon, zipping down the coastal road on her newly revitalized scooter. James felt a curious pang of emptiness after she disappeared beyond the horizon. He had no illusions, of course. She was just a kind stranger, likely passing through for good. Yet something about her lingered in his thoughts long after she was gone. Days stretched into a week, and no word came from Eleanor. Baywick quieted back into its usual dull rhythm. James threw himself into his daily grind, repairing battered trucks for local fishermen, patching more worn tires than he cared to count. The mocking whispers about that fancy scooter job died down, replaced by new gossip about the local council's plan to raise fishing permits. But one evening, while James was closing up shop, an unfamiliar black SUV rolled into town. Its sleek lines and shiny finish screamed wealth, a sharp contrast to the dusty pickups and weather-beaten sedans that normally inhabited Baywick. The passenger window lowered, revealing a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair wearing an impeccably tailored suit. "Looking for Parker's Auto Repair," the man said, scanning the street signs like he'd arrived in a foreign land. "Do you know where that might be?" James pointed across the street, a bit wary. "You're looking at it?" "I work there." The man who introduced himself as Gerard Phillips stepped out and extended a hand. "I'm looking for James Henderson." James raised an eyebrow. "That's me." Gerard's posture straightened. He seemed oddly reverent. "I came on behalf of Eleanor Morgan. You repaired her scooter recently." The name Morgan didn't ring a bell, certainly not in the sense that it carried weight. James simply nodded. Then Gerard handed him a small envelope embossed with what looked like a sophisticated letterhead. "Ms. Morgan would like to invite you to a gathering in the city if you're available. It's at the Morgan estate. She asked me to deliver this personally." James opened the envelope carefully. The invitation inside was a cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering. "You are cordially invited to a private charity event, hosted by Mr. Charles Morgan and Miss Eleanor Morgan, Estate Riverdale City. Saturday, Tiffin, 7 p.m. He blinked in disbelief. The Morgans. Could they be related to Charles Morgan, the billionaire investor who had once been photographed alongside Bill Gates and Warren Buffett at high-profile philanthropic events? The name was more than just a rumor. Charles Morgan was one of the wealthiest men in the region, a major donor to environmental causes and rumored to own real estate all across the country. James's heart hammered in his chest. This must be some mistake. He was just a broke mechanic in a fading coastal town. Why would the daughter of Charles Morgan invite him to a high-profile charity event? Why even bother with Baywick? Gerard offered a reassuring smile. "She was quite insistent. She said you did her a kindness, and she'd like you to attend as her personal guest." James gulped. "I'm not sure I can go." "My mother. We'd be happy to arrange transportation and any other assistance. Ms. Morgan hopes you'll accept the invitation." James stared at the letter, mind spinning. He thought of his mother, the mounting bills, his own sense of unworthiness. But he also remembered Eleanor's bright eyes, her earnest gratitude. Something about the invitation felt like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Perhaps it wasn't wise to turn it down. "All right," he heard himself say. "I'll go." Gerard left the next morning, assuring James that a car service would arrive Saturday to pick him up. Once word got around, courtesy of Linda Carmichael overhearing James's phone call with David Parker, the entire town buzzed with speculation, and in some circles, scornful derision. "He's going to embarrass us all, standing next to billionaires in his grease-stained jeans," muttered Todd Mitchell. "That boy better not forget us." Little people teased Sarah Redwood, a waitress at the local diner. Stephen Clark was the harshest critic. "Bet it's some kind of trick. Rich folks don't give a damn about small-town nobodies." James tried to brush it off, but he couldn't deny his nerves. What did one wear to a billionaire's charity event? He had never owned a suit. Even renting one was beyond his means. David Parker, trying to be supportive, dug through his closet and found a modest grey suit that he wore once to his daughter's wedding years ago. The jacket was slightly large on James's lean frame, but it was better than nothing. And then there was the matter of his mother. Mary insisted James not miss the opportunity. "Life is too short to turn away from kindness," she said softly, coughing into a tissue. "Go see what this is about, dear. You've done enough for me. Let someone do something for you for once." The morning of the event, James woke before dawn. Anxiety coiled in his stomach, but he forced himself to stay calm. He made his mother breakfast, ensuring she had everything she might need, then made his way to the garage. At precisely 3 p.m., a glossy black sedan pulled up outside. The driver, a polite man named Calvin, stepped out, gave a slight bow, and held the door open. "Mr. Henderson." James nodded, swallowing a lump in his throat. "That's me." The drive to Riverdale City took over 2 hours. Along the way, James stared out the window. Mind drifting from the battered docks of Baywick to the sleek highways that led into the vibrant heart of the city. Skyscrapers loomed, reflecting the late afternoon sun off glass facades that sparkled like jewels. He had never seen such bustle, such obvious prosperity. It made him feel small, but also oddly hopeful. They arrived at a long, manicured driveway, flanked by tall hedges, culminating in an imposing wrought-iron gate emblazoned with a stylized M. Security guards in tailored suits checked Calvin's credentials and waved them through. Beyond the gate spread a lush estate with sprawling lawns, fountains and gardens, carefully curated with exotic flowers. The main house, no mansion, stood like a modern palace, marble columns, sweeping staircases, massive windows. It felt more like something out of a movie than real life. James stepped out of the car, heart thumping. People in elegant outfits mingled on the front steps, and in the courtyard, their laughter and refined chatter filling the air. Some sipped champagne, others studied artwork displayed for a charity auction. A live string quartet played softly near the marble fountain. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. He felt entirely out of place. The suit jacket was too big, and he suddenly became hyper-aware of the lingering scent of motor oil on his hands. Still, he was determined not to shrink in the face of wealth. Suddenly, Eleanor Morgan appeared, gliding across the patio. She looked stunning in a floor-length midnight blue gown, her hair swept into an elegant chignon. Her face lit with genuine excitement when she spotted James. "You came," she said, weaving through the crowd to greet him. James offered a nervous half-smile. "Yeah, it's a beautiful place," he managed, glancing around in awe. Eleanor's cheeks warmed with a slight blush. "I know it must have been a bit of a trek and probably overwhelming. But I'm so glad you made it. I want you to meet my father, Charles Morgan." James nodded stiffly, swallowing the apprehension that knotted his throat. Charles Morgan was easy to spot. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a tuxedo tailored to perfection. He was engaged in conversation with a group that included a senator, a tech entrepreneur rumored to be negotiating with Elon Musk, and an actress who had starred in a recent blockbuster. When Eleanor approached, Charles turned with a polite smile. "Father, this is James Henderson," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "He helped me when my scooter broke down in Baywick." Charles's gaze swept over James with practiced observation, measuring him in a single glance. A faint curiosity flickered in his eyes. Then, surprisingly, he extended a hand, greeting James with the same graciousness he showed the senator. "I've heard quite a bit about you. Eleanor has spoken very highly of your kindness." James, momentarily star-struck, managed a polite handshake. "It was nothing, sir. I only did what anyone would have done." Charles arched an eyebrow as if amused. Not everyone would have done it. In fact, many might have taken advantage. "But you charged her fairly, and from what I understand, even turned down part of the payment." James shrugged, unsure how to respond. It just didn't feel right to take more than the cost of parts and labor. Charles nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "It's rare to find honest people nowadays," he said. "I'm grateful you looked after my daughter." The group around Charles parted politely, letting James join their circle. He suddenly found himself conversing with individuals he had only ever seen on TV or read about in magazines. A philanthropic researcher connected to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation asked for James's opinion on local environmental issues in Baywick. A famed art dealer from New York inquired about the condition of Baywick's coastal wildlife. James was caught off guard by the interest, but he answered as best he could, speaking frankly about the local fishermen's struggles with diminishing fish stocks. Throughout it all, Eleanor stayed close, a reassuring presence. She didn't shy away from revealing how they met, and whenever someone asked about James, she spoke glowingly of his work ethic, humility, and generosity. This created quite a buzz. Guests found it fascinating that a small-town mechanic had been invited into this lofty circle. The evening's main event was a charity auction raising money for marine conservation, one of Charles Morgan's pet causes. The enormous ballroom was ablaze with chandeliers, each table bedecked with fine linens, crystal and silverware that likely cost more than James earned in a month. More than once he felt like slipping out the side door, certain he didn't belong here. But a gentle hand on his arm kept him grounded. Eleanor's presence was a quiet reminder that he was wanted here, that this invitation wasn't just a whimsical afterthought. As the auction began, item after item fetched astronomical prices. A painting by a renowned artist sold for $250,000. A week-long vacation on a private yacht in the Mediterranean soared to $300,000. James watched half in awe, half in disbelief, as the wealthy crowd raised paddles without hesitation. The concept of $250,000 for a painting was beyond his comprehension. Midway through the night, Charles took the stage with a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special addition to our auction lineup, a brand new scholarship fund to support vocational training for underprivileged youth in coastal towns." He glanced down at Eleanor, who gave an encouraging smile. "In fact, it was my daughter's idea to name this scholarship. She has been quite moved by a certain individual's story, someone who exemplifies how skill and kindness can blossom in even the most challenging circumstances." Eleanor. Eleanor glided onto the stage. Her voice caught for a moment as she addressed the crowd. "I met James Henderson by chance," My scooter broke down, and I found myself stranded in Baywick. I'll be honest, I was nervous. But then I met this man, who not only fixed my scooter, but refused to overcharge me, even though he was struggling with his own financial and personal challenges. His selflessness, his dedication to family, and his passion for helping others. It inspired me to look at my own life of privilege differently. She then took a breath, steeling herself. That's why, with my father's support, I've decided to create the Henderson Scholarship, aimed at people who wish to pursue vocational trades in underfunded communities. This scholarship will also provide assistance for medical care within their families should they face hardships. We'll start in Baywick and hopefully expand. We want to uplift people who might not otherwise have the means to chase their dreams. A thunderous applause erupted. James felt the blood drain from his face. He was quite literally speechless. Did she say Henderson Scholarship? Named after him, for vocational trades and medical assistance. Things that directly resonated with his struggles. Eleanor motioned for James to stand, and the crowd cheered more loudly. Cameras flashed. Several people turned to see him, the man who had unknowingly inspired this philanthropic endeavor. Stricken by emotion, James rose slowly. His mouth was dry, his hands trembling. Across the room, Stephen Clark or Linda Carmichael would have fainted from shock had they witnessed the scene. But in this grand ballroom, in front of countless high-profile guests, all James could think was, how can this be real? When the formalities concluded, Charles Morgan ushered James into a smaller room off the main ballroom. Eleanor joined them, still visibly glowing from the excitement. Charles poured 3 glasses of champagne and offered James one. "Forgive me if this is overwhelming," Charles said gently. "We didn't do this to put you on the spot, but my daughter insisted that your example is the perfect one to show how someone's core values can have ripple effects." James swallowed hard, feeling tears threatened the corners of his eyes. "I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem enough." Eleanor set her glass down, stepping toward James with a sincerity that disarmed him. "I couldn't forget how you helped me. People tried to warn me away from a sketchy mechanic in a struggling town, but I found a genuine, caring soul who barely has enough to take care of his own family, and yet was more than willing to help a stranger." Charles nodded. "I've spoken with your boss, David Parker, and some other folks in Baywick. I learned about your mother's medical situation. I also know you've sacrificed a lot for her never complaining. Let me tell you something. All the money in the world can't buy that kind of integrity. And it's that integrity we want to invest in." James's jaw tightened in an attempt to hold back emotion. "I never expected anything like this." Charles placed a gentle hand on James's shoulder. "We'd like to make sure your mother gets the treatment she needs. We have connections with top specialists in the city or beyond if necessary. Of course, only if you accept." James's breath caught. Yes, I mean, of course. That would be—" He trailed off, overwhelmed. A tear escaped, rolling down his cheek. He brushed it away quickly, hoping he didn't look too foolish in front of them. "That's settled, then?" Charles offered a warm smile. "We'll handle all the arrangements. We'll also see about setting up a proper garage in Baywick, or perhaps an expansion of Parker's. You should have the means to pursue the life you want, James." At that, Eleanor placed a delicate hand on James's forearm, sending warmth through him. "Please don't think we see you as a charity case. This is recognition of how you live your life, the goodness in your heart." James could barely respond, only managing a hoarse "Thank you." The night ended in a swirl of well-wishers, handshakes, and congratulatory remarks. In a daze, James left the estate in the same black sedan that had brought him. The driver, Calvin, subtly adjusted the rear-view mirror, eyeing James with a knowing smile. Quite a night, wasn't it? James exhaled deeply, sinking into the leather seat. You have no idea. He arrived back in Baywick well past midnight. The single traffic light flickered amber in the deserted streets. The hush of the night was a stark contrast to the opulence of the Morgan estate. But as he let himself into his modest house, he felt a trembling sense of joy. For so long he had carried burdens alone, now unbelievably there was help. The next morning he told his mother everything. Mary's eyes filled with tears as she held his hand. I told you, James. Sometimes life repays kindness in ways we can never imagine. But in a place like Baywick, big news doesn't stay quiet for long. Within days, the town was ablaze with chatter about the Henderson Scholarship. Linda Carmichael almost choked on her iced tea when she heard the name. Stephen Clark was heard muttering something along the lines of, "What do they see in him, jealous to the bone?" Yet others like Sarah Redwood were genuinely thrilled for James proud that someone from their town had made such a connection. A week later, 2 corporate representatives from Morgan Industries arrived. They met with James David Parker and the local town council to discuss establishing a training program that would help local youth learn mechanical skills. Funding for the program would come directly from the Henderson Scholarship. Students who completed the program could then be connected to job placements at Morgan's affiliates across the state. It was the kind of economic lifeline Baywick had needed for years. All the while, James sensed a new direction forming in his life. He didn't feel pressured to chase wealth or status. He simply wanted to continue helping those around him, now with more resources than he had ever dreamed possible. During the scholarship planning phase, Eleanor visited Baywick often. She insisted on traveling discreetly. Her father's entourage could overwhelm the small town, so she would sometimes drive herself, or even ride that same scooter, which James had fixed to near perfection, to keep a low profile. They spent hours in the old garage going over paperwork for the scholarship, discussing ways to improve the town's crumbling infrastructure. James introduced her to local fishermen who openly shared their struggles. She seemed genuinely touched by the realness of it all. For Eleanor, it was a far cry from the gilded parties and exclusive clubs she had grown up in. Inevitably, gossip soared. Linda Carmichael spread rumors that the billionaire's daughter was dating the broke mechanic. Teenagers whispered excitedly whenever they saw James and Eleanor together. Even David Parker teased James, suggesting he ask her out. James, for his part, was cautious. Eleanor was not only a wealthy benefactor, but also turning into a friend, someone who actually listened to him, respected his work, and cared about his mother's health. He was acutely aware of their vast differences in background and lifestyle. Yet each time she laughed at one of his quiet jokes or smiled with genuine delight as he demonstrated how to change an engine's timing belt, the twinge of possibility gnawed at his heart. As the weeks passed, the possibility grew stronger. One evening, after a day of scholarship meetings, they stood together on the shoreline. The sun dipped below the water, casting orange and pink streaks across the sky. Seagulls screeched overhead. Eleanor sighed, hugging her light jacket around her shoulders as a gentle breeze ruffled her hair. "I love it here," she murmured. "There's a sense of peace, a rawness that's refreshing compared to the polished halls of the city." James gazed at her heart, thudding. "I guess I never appreciated it that way. I've been too focused on surviving." She turned toward him, that warm flicker in her hazel eyes, And now that you have a bit of help, what do you dream about?" He swallowed, flustered. No one had asked him such a question in years. I dream of seeing my mother healthy. Maybe opening my own full-service garage, employing the youngsters from Baywick who want to learn trades. And he hesitated, heart-pounding, and perhaps having someone to share it with. Someone who understands. Someone I can trust. A gentle smile curved across Eleanor's lips. "I think those are beautiful dreams, James." Their gaze lingered on each other. The moment swelled with unspoken possibility, shimmering in the last glow of the evening sky. But even fairy tales have obstacles. Word reached James that the local real estate shark, Robert Hawkins, had an eye on the waterfront property near the docks. He planned to buy it up, demolish the old fish factory, and build luxury condos. The project threatened to displace long-time residents and hamper the bay's fragile ecosystem. Furious fishermen approached James, hoping his new connections with Morgan Industries might help them push back. At the same time, an unexpected rift began to form between James and Charles Morgan. Not from any hostility, but from a protective caution on Charles's part. The father saw how Eleanor gravitated toward James, how she lit up when discussing Baywick or the new scholarship. He realized that she was more than just grateful she was developing real feelings for the young mechanic. Charles, having spent decades dealing with fortune hunters and opportunists, couldn't shake the fear that James's sincerity might waver under the influence of wealth. While he admired James greatly, he also had paternal instincts to shield Eleanor from heartbreak or manipulation. Subtle friction arose in conversations. Charles would drop gentle reminders about keeping things professional or offer to introduce James to other philanthropic circles, hoping to steer him away from any direct romantic entanglement with Eleanor. One afternoon, after a meeting about the scholarship, Charles invited James into his office, a sleek, contemporary space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Riverdale's skyline. "James," he began politely, "I want you to know that I respect your work. Your integrity is inspiring. But I must be candid. Eleanor is my only daughter. I'd do anything to protect her." James's pulse quickened. "I understand that, sir. I can't thank you enough for what you've done for me and my town." Charles leaned forward, eyes firm. "I see the way you look at each other. I'm not blind." He paused, letting the words settle in the hush of the room. "I've encountered many people who saw me, my family, as a stepping stone. I'm sure you're not that type. But you need to understand how precarious this can be. She lives in a world filled with scrutiny and high stakes." James swallowed, trying to maintain composure. "Mr. Morgan, I'd never exploit her or your family. I owe you everything." Charles sighed, softening his tone. "I know that. But emotions can cloud judgment. My resources are vast, and many see that as an opportunity. I only ask that you be careful." By the time James returned to Baywick that evening, he felt conflicted. He respected Charles owed him a debt that could never be repaid. Yet he was also drawn to Eleanor in ways he couldn't deny. Would stepping away from her be the honorable thing to do, to avoid any notion of taking advantage? These thoughts churned in his mind, overshadowing even the new threat from Robert Hawkins. But as days passed, the real estate issue demanded his attention. Hawkins had begun filing permits, ignoring the environmental concerns that would disrupt the coastline. The fishermen grew angrier, worried they'd lose the docking space they'd used for generations. Flyers protesting Hawkins's project plastered Baywick's telephone poles. James approached Eleanor for help. She promised to speak to her father, who had significant influence in state politics. "Let me see what I can do," she said, determination in her voice. Baywick deserves better than some reckless development. But problems escalated when Hawkins's lawyers threatened to sue the city council, pressuring them to sign off on the permits. James, with the help of David Parker and the newly formed Henderson Scholarship Committee, organized a protest to draw media attention. They reached out to environmental groups, local news stations, anyone who would listen. The stories eventually reached Riverdale City's largest newspaper, which published an exposé on the environmental risks of Hawkins's plan. In the midst of it all, James's mother took a turn for the worse. Despite improved treatments arranged by Morgan's medical team, her condition suddenly deteriorated. One morning, James found her too weak to get out of bed, her fever raging. Panicked, he rushed her to the local clinic, then to a bigger hospital in Riverdale. Specialists recommended immediate surgery, complex and expensive. Eleanor, upon hearing the news, dropped everything. She raced to the hospital, staying by James's side in the waiting room, while Mary was prepped for surgery. Their hands found each other, fingers interlacing in mutual support. When Charles arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. He saw Eleanor leaning into James's shoulder, her eyes red with tears. Yet he also saw the devotion in James's gaze, the raw vulnerability that spoke louder than any hidden agenda could. Later that night, the surgeons emerged with cautious optimism Mary had made it through the procedure. They needed to monitor her closely, but for now she was stable. Relief washed over James like a tide. He leaned against Eleanor, pressing his forehead to hers, gratitude blending with exhaustion. That was the moment Charles truly saw what James meant to his daughter, and vice versa. The father took a step back, quietly watching. In James's trembling arms holding on to his mother's life, there was no deception, only love. It wasn't about social climbing or financial gain. It was genuine, raw, and real. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Mary began a slow, steady recovery, assisted by top-notch medical care the Morgans provided. Hawkins's real estate project encountered mounting resistance thanks to press coverage and the Morgan family's political connections. Lawyers discovered numerous environmental violations in Hawkins's plans, halting construction and forcing him to face possible legal consequences. Baywick breathed a collective sigh of relief. The fishermen kept their docks, the environment remained safeguarded, and the town, buoyed by the scholarship program, started showing signs of revitalization. Workshops at Parker's Auto filled with eager apprentices. The local hardware store saw increased business. Even Linda Carmichael had to admit that James Henderson's fancy connections had done wonders for the community. Meanwhile, the bond between James and Eleanor grew deeper. There were quiet walks along the beach, shared moments reading by Mary's bedside, and late-night conversations in the old garage. They discovered more about each other. Eleanor's passion for painting, James's hidden love for music. Each day seemed to bring them closer, forging a relationship that transcended the gap between their worlds. Charles, seeing his daughter's happiness and James's unwavering compassion, gave his blessing. One evening he even invited James to a private dinner. Over wine and gourmet cuisine prepared by the Morgan Estate's chef, Charles apologized if he had seemed harsh. "Like I said, I've encountered many who tried to exploit my family," Charles explained, swirling the wine in his glass. "But I realize now that your heart is in the right place. And that's all a father truly wants for his daughter, someone who treats her well and stands by her side in good times and bad." James felt his throat tighten. I promise I won't let her down." Charles's gaze flickered with approval. "I know." As Mary's health improved, James found himself with a rare moment of calm. Standing at the harbour, the wind whipping through his hair, he recalled that moment months ago, fixing a broken scooter, the ridicule of passers-by, Linda Carmichael's gossip, Stephen Clark's sneers. None of them had known that the young woman on that scooter was the daughter of a billionaire. None of them had dreamed how this simple act of kindness could reshape lives. The sun was setting, sending streaks of orange and pink across the horizon. He heard footsteps in the sand behind him. Turning, he saw Eleanor. She was out of her formal city attire, wearing a soft sweater and jeans, looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. The golden light caught her hair, giving her an almost ethereal glow. She held out a small package wrapped in simple paper. "I wanted you to have this." James opened it carefully. Inside lay a vintage watch, its face etched with the words, "Time reveals all truths." He glanced up, brow furrowed. "It belonged to my grandfather," Eleanor explained. "He gave it to me when I was a teenager, saying that it should go to someone who understands the value of hard work, honesty, and patience. I think he'd have approved of you." Emotion clogged James's voice. "Eleanor, I can't accept this. It's a family heirloom." She moved closer, her eyes steady. "James, you and we've become more than friends, more than just people who met by chance. Everything that's happened, your generosity toward me, my family's gratitude, what we've done for Baywick, none of it is an accident. I believe in fate, and I believe you deserve this." She hesitated, taking a deep breath. "I also wanted to tell you something important." His pulse quickened as he searched her face. "What is it?" She bit her lip, eyes shimmering. "I love you, James." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then he carefully set the watch aside and reached for her hands. "I love you too, Eleanor," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The words felt both surreal and completely natural, like they had been waiting to be spoken all along. They leaned into each other, the faint sound of waves lapping against the dock, the briny wind tangling in their hair. In that quiet instant, every challenge they'd faced, every scornful whisper, every worry about money and status, melted away, replaced by the warmth of an undeniable connection. Over the next few months, James and Eleanor carefully navigated the balance between their two worlds. Baywick began to transform, gradually shedding its image as a forgotten coastal town. With the Henderson Scholarship funding vocational training and small business grants, new shops opened, old homes got renovated. Morale soared. People felt hopeful for the first time in years. David Parker's garage expanded, hiring additional mechanics and training apprentices. James now a co-owner. Thanks to a low-interest loan arranged by Morgan's philanthropic division, spent long hours teaching newly enrolled students. He loved watching them gain confidence as they mastered tools and techniques. The scholarship covered tuition stipends and materials, ensuring financial barriers didn't stop anyone with the will to learn. Meanwhile, Mary's health stabilized. With advanced care and therapy, she managed to regain mobility and a spark in her eyes that James hadn't seen since childhood. One afternoon, she even visited the garage, hobbling on a cane. She beamed with pride as she watched her son instruct a group of teens on engine maintenance. Eleanor alternated between her father's philanthropic engagements and her blossoming relationship with James. Sometimes she felt torn between her high society obligations and the simpler life in Baywick, that gave her so much peace. Yet with each day, she found more ways to merge the two worlds, introducing wealthy donors to the tangible results of the scholarship, bringing philanthropic ideas to the local council, or just quietly spending weekends with James, strolling along the beach or cooking together in his humble kitchen. Charles Morgan visited as well, meeting local leaders and ensuring the scholarship's success. He took quiet pride in seeing Eleanor flourish, and while the tabloids occasionally ran headlines like "Billionaire's Daughter Courts," "Small-Town Mechanic," or Eleanor Morgan's surprising romance, the noise didn't deter them. They were too busy building something real to be bothered. On a crisp autumn afternoon, James was busy in the garage, tinkering with a new training scooter for the scholarship program. Eleanor entered with a playful grin, carrying a tray of coffees. She set them on the bench, handing him one. He thanked her with a quick kiss on the cheek. "You've come a long way from the girl with the broken scooter," he teased, tapping a wrench against his palm. She laughed. "I guess I owe you my entire future for that fateful breakdown." Just then, a battered old scooter chugged into the driveway. A teenage boy wearing an oversized helmet hopped off, looking sheepish. My scooter died," he said. "Can anyone fix it?" James and Eleanor exchanged a knowing smile. "Absolutely," James called out. "Bring it in." The boy wheeled the scooter into the garage, eyeing the fancy equipment and wide-open workspace. "This place is amazing," he murmured. "Used to be just a run-down hole in the wall." James shrugged, warmth creeping into his expression. "We had a little help." Eleanor patted the boy's shoulder. "Don't worry, we'll get you up and running in no time." As they set to work, guiding him on how to diagnose and repair the engine, James couldn't help but marvel at how life had come full circle. Not long ago, he had been in that exact spot, scrounging for parts, uncertain if his next meal would stretch to the following week. Now, with the Morgan family's support and Eleanor's unwavering faith, he was teaching the next generation the same mechanical and life skills that had once sustained him. And somewhere along the line, he had found a new home in Eleanor's heart. The daughter of a billionaire, the girl whose broken scooter had changed both of their lives, now stood beside him in greasy coveralls, smiling as she helped a kid learn about spark plugs. Time passed gently, like the tide smoothing the edges of the Baywick shore. What had started as a single moment of kindness, a mechanic repairing a stranger's broken scooter, had now become a story whispered with awe throughout the region. James and Eleanor's bond only grew stronger with each passing season. Their days were a blend of love and service mornings, spent together over quiet breakfasts, afternoons mentoring young mechanics in the workshop, and evenings volunteering in the community, or walking hand in hand along the water's edge. The people of Baywick, once skeptical and even mocking, had embraced the pair wholeheartedly. Engagement rumors swirled regularly now, fueled by their unwavering closeness and the unmistakable tenderness in every shared glance. But James and Eleanor remained grounded, choosing to build their future, slowly savoring each shared accomplishment rather than rushing toward ceremony or spectacle. Charles Morgan, once hesitant, had become one of James's fiercest supporters. He introduced him not only as his daughter's partner, but also as a trusted collaborator in Morgan Foundation projects. The Henderson Scholarship expanded under their guidance, reaching other struggling towns like Baywick, offering technical education, job placements, and medical support for families in need. What began as a tribute had evolved into a transformative movement, one James never imagined bearing his name. Baywick itself had undergone a quiet revolution. The garage, now renamed Morgan Henderson Training Center, served as both a community hub and mechanical school. Apprentices who had once arrived timid and uncertain were now confidently rebuilding engines, mentoring newcomers, and earning steady pay. Local businesses prospered, community pride swelled, and for the first time in decades, hope seemed to line every street. Even those who once scoffed, like Linda Carmichael and Stephen Clark, had changed their tune. Linda had become the scholarship's unofficial ambassador, organizing bake sales and community drives with the enthusiasm of someone trying to make amends. Stephen Clark, long a rival, collaborated with James on a youth internship initiative, offering placements at both their garages and setting aside past pride. For James, the most profound joy came from witnessing his mother's continued recovery. With top-tier care now accessible, Mary regained not just strength, but joy. She often visited the garage, sharing stories with the apprentices and bragging about her son's miraculous scooter repair that had changed their lives forever. In rare, quiet moments, James would glance at the vintage watch Eleanor had given him, still ticking faithfully. The inscription, "Time reveals all truths," resonated more deeply now than ever before. What time had revealed was this love, integrity, and compassion could transcend class, wealth, and skepticism. They could build bridges that once seemed impassable. And as Eleanor reached for his hand each evening, her fingers warm, steady, and sure, James knew this was more than a legacy. It was a life born not of luck or fortune, but of one selfless choice to help a stranger in need. Thank you for joining us on this inspiring journey of how a simple act of kindness reshaped lives forever. James Henderson's story reminds us all that compassion can change everything, bridging the gap between worlds once thought impossible to unite. From a rundown garage in a struggling coastal town to the dazzling realm of billionaire philanthropy, this tale proves that genuine warmth, honesty, and a readiness to help can triumph over skepticism and adversity. If this story moved your heart, please consider giving a like, sharing it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribing to our channel. By doing so, you help spread the message that even the smallest gestures can light a spark of hope in the darkest times. Let's keep this spirit of generosity alive together. We can make every day an opportunity to lift others up and discover the extraordinary in the ordinary.